And we are so, this feel very, very fortunate to have one of our original homesteading family members with us this afternoon. Ralph's grandfather.
Costs a lot of money.
Yeah. Ralph's grandfather was one of the original homesteaders on Sanibel in 1888. So we feel very fortunate that he is with us today, his wife Jean, and that we can really learn firsthand what we share with our visitors. Because every once in a while, Ralph, we have to have, just a time to spend with the real individual, so we make sure we're telling the right stories. Now, we always tell the right stories here.
What we don't remember, we'll lie. How about that?
That's right. But anyway, we are so fortunate. We feel very fortunate to have you with us today. We give you a big welcome in the same way that
Thank you.
Now, a lot of you did send in questions, and I've kind of thrown them away because I do think that Ralph will give us most of those answers just with a few simple questions about each building, and that really relates to our mission here anyway. So Ralph has been really good in doing a lot of public speaking lately. I don't know how many of you have seen the exhibit, the Woodring exhibit at Ding Darling. Show of hands. If you haven't seen it, you must go see it. It's a wonderful exhibit. Just for a little basic understanding, Ralph grew up on Woodring Point. He still lives there. Can you give us a very simple explanation of how you're living there now and where the property has gone and how it's deeded?
Well, Jeannie and I decided some years back that we did not want the property to be developed into, well, I would say condominiums, if you will. Anyway, none of our family had the means to pay for more than a shovel full of dirt down there. So we thought the best thing to do was to come up with some outfit that would take care of it and keep it in perpetuity. Is that a good word? Anyway, shopped around a little bit, and seeming like 2020 would do part of the property. That's the county administrated organization. And then Fish and Wildlife, United States Fish and Wildlife, would do the other. But in the meantime, the Ding Darling Wildlife Society had the money and the pull and whatever to make it all happen. And so they bought or helped the 2020 program come off, and then actually purchased the property that we're living on. We have a life estate where we are. And the county told us straight out in one of their county meetings that they do not buy buildings. So the home that we lived in was on the 2020 property, was torn down, which was kind of a gut-wrenching thing. But anyway, it happened. It's clear and clean. The only thing over there is some bushes and some rabbits and gophers. And the homestead, or not homestead, the property that we live on now took up part of the Wildlife Society property, but not all of it, simply because we have to pay the taxes on the part that we're actually living on and taking care of. So we kept that to a minimum that we could. And Wildlife Society does come down and check and see that we're not doing anything really too bad down there. So that's we're pretty happy and satisfied with the way it's going. And knowing that the old house, which I was raised in, will be there, and we've also set up a fund, a chunk of money, whatever you want to call it, to take care of it after we're gone, so that we don't have somebody saying we're going to shut the government down so the money don't come through like it needs to be here, there, and abouts. Anyway, hopefully it'll all come out the way we planned, and it looks good. We've got a good relationship with Paul Tritek and with the Wildlife Society also. So good things in that respect as far as I'm concerned.
Do you still fish?
That's what I was going to ask.
Well, I've got 3 or 4 different licenses, if you will, to do with fishing. One is a wholesale license that has to do with I can purchase fish or shrimp or whatever and sell them to retailers. Or also I have licenses for the boats that we fish with, the shrimp boat and the other 2 boats that we catch either hook and line or cast net. So yes, damn little of it, if you will, but not near as much as I'd like. But we do. I do still fish on the opportunity that it comes whenever there are fish around. And I will tell you now that in our part of the world, Tarpon Bay and Woodring Point, they're so few and far between that you might spend the whole day out there and catch nothing. It's that bad.
So you're not retired yet?
Retarded, yes.
Not retired.
Here's the other sad story. My wife told me you got to sell the bait box because you need to get out from under that, where you can just lay around and fish and whatever.
Take me traveling.
See what I mean? So we sold the bait box and got our money and decided we was going to, do our thing. And got another business that was located behind the bait box at one point, and it got large, and I decided anybody wanted to buy the bait box. They did not want to probably purchase a wholesale business. So we were wholesaling fishing tackle and related products there for some time. Anyway, we eventually moved that across the pond to Kelly Road. And so this was going on about 1.5 years over there and rocking along pretty good, we thought. So we sold a bait box, and then we go over there to check in, see what's going on, and somebody in the duo here irritated people over there, and they all quit. Guess what? Now we've got a 5-day-a-week job, whether we like it or not. You can't let the business go down the tube, even though some folks would.
I'd give it away.
But there's probably $95.54 over there worth of fishing tackle, at least, with related products. And so trying to get it back on its feet. The severance from the bait box obviously is a shot we have to take care of. The feds are going to look into this, and no telling who else. Be sure that we didn't do anything wrong, stupid, or illegal. So anyway, that's where we stand now, trying to bring it back into the real world, if you will. But in the meantime, we have rented one warehouse over there from Henry Nutshine, if you guys all know Henry. I call him Curly, because he's got that curly hair. So we got too much stuff. We had to rent the next door warehouse. So now we got 2 warehouses full of junk.
He is no stranger to hard work, though. I know you'll get through this, and Gene will find somebody to help with it, and you'll be able to travel.
Well, we hired one lady, and she worked 3 or 4 weeks, and she quit. We hired another one. She worked 1 week, and she quit. So,
But did they know anything about fishing tackle?
not really, but it takes a while before you get on to what the fishing tackle is all about. And, some folks would say, well, he's pretty damn hard to get along with, and that may have had some bearing on it, I don't know. They won't tell you. I don't like the old SOB, they just they go to my manager and say, I quit, the keys are on the truck bed, ain't coming back. Anyway, we just hired another lady, and hopefully she'll do a better job of staying with us and trying to do some of the things that need to be done. In the meantime, Jeannie's been filling up, doing the payroll and other things that have to be done to keep the employees happy and the government off our necks. But that's where we are.
Okay.
That just came from over there, by the way. Don't y'all feel sorry for me.
Okay, just one more thing. It's an online business, is that correct?
No.
It's a wholesale business.
Right.
Okay, fine.
And
Great.
do you have any fishing, are you teaching at all? Is there anyone teaching fishing?
Not really. I did some of that over the years, a lot of it at the bait box from time to time, whatever the case may be. Older folks, younger folks, whatever, that needed to learn how to throw a cast net or rig a fishing line to the reel or whatever. And then I was head of the START organization for some years, which was supposedly solutions to avoid red tide, although we never did get down to that part of it. But it is still going. The C School, Bruce Neal has taken over as head of the START organization and trying to get more into water quality, which basically what it's all about as far as the red tide and all the nonsense that goes along with it is water quality. If you get good water quality, then you don't really have the red tide. And I don't know whether you folks know and understand, and I will run through that just for the pure living hell of it. But when you talk about red tide, the bug, what is that name of that thing? Corynea brevis is prevalent in the water column at all times. It never goes away. It's just the fact that it is minute and does not have a real problem until it gets all the good stuff that feeds it and then boom, it blooms. So, you never know where the hell that's going to be for a number of reasons. Think about the wind, the tide, the water coming out of the river. All these things contribute to where that bloom is going to be, anywhere up and down the coast, firstly. And it does move with the tide, it moves with the wind. The other thing is that as the moment they talk about the red tide report, and we've had some small red tide reports in the area, up one side and down the other. But what this really means is that this guy is there, is prevalent, but it's not blooming. And if it does bloom, it's very small and it's not expanding. So you have to take this into consideration when you talk about the red tide, and you know how the news people do with this stuff, television, and I can't say newspaper because it's so skinny anymore, they don't have much in it. But anyway, the idea that, that the red tide is there at all times, and if there's a bloom, then they really make a big deal out of it. Okay, here's the next step. When it blooms, and starts killing fish and everything else in its path, depending on how severe it is, this stuff dies and goes to the bottom for a while, usually about 12 hours or so, depending on water temperature, which is another factor in red tide, because they say at nighttime it goes to the bottom, and daytime it comes up to get the sunlight. But anyway, water temperature controls whether the fish stays on the bottom how long. When it comes to the top, obviously it's floating, and part of it yet generally is above the water so that the wind can get to it. So when you see dead fish on the beach, no idea where they came from. You know, they're probably up floating for at least a week, maybe more, depending again on water temperature. So if you look at the type of fish it is, you say, well, it's grouper or jewfish or mackerel. Generally, those are offshore fish, and so they have come from offshore. They died, came to the top, the wind and the tide worked on them until it pushed them on the beach. If it's other stuff, sheep's head and trout, mullet particularly, generally around the island, mostly on the inside, but on the outside also. So you just never really know, or it doesn't make any difference, quite frankly. You know, if you got red tide and it's killing fish, it breaks your heart, and it makes you sick to your stomach, it hurts your eyes, but it is so damn distressing to know that this thing comes about because we people, if you will, are ones contributing the most to the ingredients that make it bloom and kill everything. And again, I'll say to you that our red tides in the past year and a half, basically, we lasted, were scattered all over from Tampa Bay all the way down to the Keys. They obviously had some in the Panhandle, they had some in Texas, they had some on the East Coast. This stuff is everywhere. There's no way that you can say, well, it's a Southwest Florida problem. It's just like, if you think about it, I don't believe there's a state in the union that doesn't have water quality problems. Whether it's a river, a lake, you know, they've got the lamprey eels up in the Great Lakes, just as we have the lionfish down here. So, again, it's a people problem, if you will. We all need to go out with our ice picks and get rid of all them bad fish. I guess I don't know what else is going to happen. But anyway, the red tide thing is certainly not going to go away. We just hope that with the new regime, the powers that be, put enough money towards trying to take care of some of the problems that we got to keep the stuff that feeds the red tide to a minimum, possibly even get it to the point where it doesn't really make a big deal like it has in the past. But we've had it for a lot of years off and on, so I don't think it's going to go away. But I'm going to be here to see when it gets better.
Good. We're very fortunate to have people like Ralph working on this issue. But now I want to go to the past. So
That's where I excel.
You're right. I want to ask you about this building first, Shorehaven, Daisy Mayer's house. Is there anything you can tell us about Daisy Mayer or this house? Or I think you might be able to tell me that the road used to go in front of that house, not behind of it. We're talking about Bay Drive.
Yes, it did.
Is there anything about Daisy or the Mayers that we need to know?
Well, Daisy Mayer was a fine lady. She was kind of old, like we all get sometimes, but she was young enough to be able to take care of her home and the people that she needed to help her keep the place cleaned up. One of her specialties was to fish off her dock. And back then the fishing was so good that she could always take a rod and reel. And she used, back then, there was a float about that big around, cork, came off of gill nets. That big, and it had a hole in the middle where you run a rope through that, and that's what kept the gill nets afloat on the bay when they were gill net fishing. And so she requested and got from us a few of those floats that she used to also help to cast out when she was casting off the dock. She had a regular rod and reel, that she used. And she'd fish off the dock and usually catch supper there without any problem whatsoever. Any kind of fish you can think of, redfish, trout, sheep's head, mackerel, all those things there. And let's see, what about Daisy Mayer? Daisy Mayer was a really good friend of my mom's and the Murphys, Priscilla and Pat Murphy, Priscilla was a realtor and Pat was a mail carrier here on Sanibel for some period of time. And the big deal at nighttime was either a movie at the community house, which most everybody went to because it was the same old stuff that they had probably seen last year. But anyway, if it wasn't that, then the Murphys and the Woodrings and Mayer would get together and play canasta, usually at the Murphys' house, which is now John Wood's office there. Anyway, one kind of a funny story was that one of the gals particularly, usually always was a little bit sleepy, and generally it was Priscilla Murphy. And so when it got late, like 10:30 at night, they got tired of playing, and Priscilla was doing this, and she would say to Pat, was the other partner, we need to go because Mrs. Mayer's getting sleepy. Anyway, they all had some pretty good canasta games up there. My mom was not much of a card player, but she did learn how to play canasta and was in the canasta club, if you will, whatever. That went on for some years, and of course usually had something to do with supper time as well. The Murphys particularly were real good to my mom and me. And we did not have an automobile for a lot of years, and so in the beginning years when Pat Murphy was the mail carrier, there was not a road down to Woodring Point, and so we would meet him at Tarpon Bay in the boat, and he had a Jeep that he used to deliver mail. He'd pick us up and take us to the community house and for the movie, or to his and Priscilla's home where we'd have supper, and then the canasta game would it'd carry on.
Before I forget, you mentioned the community house, and we again are very thankful for your family because your father was, I think, the major cash contributor to that project, to build that building back in the 1920s.
Well, initially he was. My dad liked to have a drink or two, and I don't know how they coerced him into coming to the meeting, but they had a meeting somewhere up on the island, and bottle got passed around a time or two, but there's a lot of chatter about how to do it and where to do it and who was going to contribute or whatever. Anyway, he got tired of the stuff, as the story goes, from my mom, and said, well, what the hell, I'll tell y'all, I will contribute the first $500 towards the building. When y'all get ready to do it, you come down and see me and I'll write you a check. And so that was the way with that. He took his bottle and he left. Story goes that next morning, in spite of all the mosquitoes and whatever was going on, they had to walk down through the swamp to get to our house because there was no road down there. And 2 or 3 of the powers that be came by and said, did you really mean what you said last night, Sam? That wasn't just liquor talking. Well, hell no. You know, he's almost as vulgar as I am. God damn it, if I say I'll do it, I'll do it. Wrote him a check. And so the community house was the center of the island. All the good times that you can believe that went on, that we could tell about, went on there for a lot of years.
Alrighty, and how about the store? Did you go to Bailey's store when you were a child? The Bayfront store that we have right here?
How'd you know about that?
What do I know?
The original post office with,
I haven't gotten to the post office yet, that's right.
you hush, I'm telling this damn story. The original post office was at halfway between Bailey's store and our home. And Will Reed was the postmaster, and the mailboat docked there and unloaded the mail, and then there was a mail carrier that took it from there and delivered and then back. So the boat came around 10 o'clock in the morning and brought the mail and other items too, but mostly mail in those days. And then on to Captiva to deliver their mail. Back at 2 o'clock, picked the mail up, back to town. When the 44 hurricane came, it took a swath of all the bridges and road that came from Bailey's old store all the way down. There were 4 bridges down through there. And the 44 hurricane cleaned the bridges out so that there was no way that they could deliver or pick up the mail and deliver it. Therefore, the county built a pier, or dock, if you will, down in front of Bailey's store, and that's where the mail boat started coming and delivered mail there, and freight, ice, all the stuff that came to Bailey's store came there, and that was actually the center of commerce. Again, 10 o'clock in the morning, if you wanted to find friends and relatives or enemies or whatever, you show up at Bailey's store. And then the mailboat went to St. James. They had to meet the mailboat out there with a rowboat because there was no dock, no pier, no way for them to get ashore. So they bring the rowboat out, throw the mail sacks in onto to the post office, and then on to Captiva, the mailboat on to Captiva, and then the same thing, made a turnaround back to St. James and then back to Sanibel to Bailey's store at 2 o'clock. To pick up the mail. And we could set our watch by watching the mailboat come down the bay, know exactly what time he was going to be at a certain point, and knowing that he'd be at Bailey's store at 2 o'clock within a couple of minutes. Anyway, the Bailey's store then blossomed, if you will, simply because it was the center of commerce. There was nothing else going on that amounted to anything around. And yes, I did go into Bailey's store many, many times from the time that I guess I was just about big enough to walk good. You know, most of our buying was done in Fort Myers. Once a month or so, we'd go over and clean out the grocery stores. But if you needed something special, a can of beans or soup or something, Bailey's always had something on hand that you could make a meal out of to keep you from starving to death. And they carried a little bit of everything there. They had a little bit of hardware, some fishing tackle. I remember hooks and things that they had. And Frank Bailey had a big desk over in the corner. And the family Bailey family and my family were fairly close, even though neighbors could be a long way away. Neighbors were only thing that you had between you and whatever the hell else went on. If you were sick, sober, sorry, whatever, some neighbor would help you some way, somehow. The pine trees down on Woodring Point, Frank Bailey gave to my dad, and we've still got like 5 or 6 of them there, I guess the originals, which we just trimmed the other day to keep the hurricane from blowing over. And of course, the pine trees all up and down the Periwinkle Way that are now deceased. Sore subject. That the Baileys planted. Frank Bailey was the store owner, had a brother, Ernest, and Ernest didn't do much of anything but just take a sun bath every day and keep an eye on things around there. The Bailey brothers, 3 of them, used to torment the old man. They told me they get up in the pine trees and he's hard of hearing, and they'd shoot him with a BB gun, you know, and get him. He would be looking around, seeing what was going on. So one day,
Sorry, it's not vodka, it's just our water.
anybody got any vodka? Thank you. Once upon a time, one day, I was a little older, used to ride my bicycle down to Bailey's and try to get in some kind of trouble. And so I managed pretty good this day. Sam Bailey said, Uncle Ernest is going to be out in the back warehouse. And he wore a swimsuit around most of the time. And when he got ready to take a sunbath, he took a couple of cardboard boxes and put them around and took everything off. And he stuck his rear end up in the air to get that sun. And you know, we didn't understand this, but that's the way it was. And so Sam said, you know, I had some firecrackers. Said, set one of them firecrackers off there. So went out into the warehouse, and the door had a crack in it. I put the firecracker there and lit it and poked it through, and it hit the old man and knocked his hide off a little bit. Well, the Bailey boys got the brunt of that. I did not get into it. I just got on my bicycle and hauled Fanny for home. But anyway, the last thing I heard going out the door to get on my bicycle was, God damn, what was that? He didn't even know what the firecracker was or went off or nothing. But anyway, Frank Bailey did get on his boys and climbed their frame good about it. So, you know, they never forgot that. The other thing about Ernest was there was a warehouse out on the head of Bailey's Dock, just an old building, and on the far side towards the lighthouse was a small deck there, and sometimes he would go around there and put the cardboard boxes up. Was all fine and good till the wind came and blowed the boxes away. He never worried too much about it. He'd just scurry on back around in the building and put his swimsuit back on, and it was. I don't know whether they'd put him in jail this day and time for that or not, but it was a funny thing.
He was quite elderly at that point, though, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. Everybody was that was old.
Yeah.
My dad and Frank Bailey were pretty good friends, as I said, and so my dad always would when he came to the store, I'd break a pint with him, and he and Frank would have a nip there in the store. And that's the reason that we know that they had to get along. You know, you don't offer a drink to anybody that's your enemy. You just offer him a drink if he's a friend. The other story was I had an aunt that was like my grandmother. She is short. And when she came to visit my mom, she went down into Bailey's and introduced to Mr. Bailey. And so his name for her was Half Pint. Okay, wherever that come from, you know, who knows? Had something to do with liquor? Well, maybe. Anyway, what else? What other question you got?
This is kind of out of sync, but
Yeah, I do that.
How close were you with your mom's family? Did you get to go to Keokasta and visit occasionally, or Is this the aunt you were just discussing, Half Pint? Was she a Padilla? Is that your mom's?
Well, yes, she
Family's
was,
name?
but they were from Tampa.
Oh, okay.
You have to understand that back then, going to Costa was a whole damn day's journey.
Right.
And so you didn't go and come back the same day. Mostly it was sailing until I got up a little bit bigger, and then it was motorboats. But still, the boats were slow, and they were not designed for speed. They were designed to take you out fishing somewhere and bring you back home, hopefully. There were occasions when my mom and my dad went to Costa before my time, basically, but the reason was not so much to see family. Generally, there was always some business to be transacted, you know. He had whiskey that he had to take up there and sell, and so that was one of the things. They even took a trip one time, I know, they went to Dunedin in the motorboat that they had. Back then, you named your boat after the guy that built it. And so the name of this boat was the Riggs. John Riggs built this boat. She was about 24 feet long and had a Kermath engine in it. And again, it was not a speedboat by any means. So it took 2 days to get to Dunedin. And they took their cast net and their camp gear, whatever, along the way, and just stayed and overnight, and hoped that the mosquitoes weren't so bad that they'd carry him away. But the idea that it's hard to comprehend today, because you know you can get about anywhere you want to go fairly fast and with a boat or car or whatever. But starting out, we didn't have a road to Woodring Point at all. There were 4 bridges between Bailey's store and the old post office, the old Reed post office. And at one time, they were navigable, if you will, and so the guy delivered mail came down across there, but then the 44 Hurricane washed them away. And so it was either walk all the way to Bailey's store and get your feet wet, or go by boat. At one time, before those bridges were in place, the post office mailman actually ran from Periwinkle down across the sand flat and to the Reed place. There was no bridges at all. And later years, when they did put the bridges in, and of course he used that route. But back when the mail was picked up and delivered through the sand flat area, which again is like running from north to south, if you will, just about a direct line. The Reed place is on the bay, facing out towards the causeway, and the sand flat back then, if you see some of these pictures, there's just not a whole lot of mangrove trees and things back there. There was a lot of wide open sand flat area, which we call it's not high enough that the tide won't go over it, but most of the time it's high enough that the water's not so deep that back then they'd run through salt water, not a big deal. The time that we had to come to the Reed post office to get our mail, we had to walk. And somehow my dad got a deal with the county that they put a boardwalk down on the end of what is known as Woodring Point, if you will. It was about 500 feet of boards that were like 2 foot wide and up off the mangrove, so we could walk down through there without getting our feet wet to go get our mail. The deal was there, and I don't know this to be a fact, just something in my mind, but the John Morris Road was named after my uncle, John Morris. He married my dad's sister. He was a county commissioner. And so I suspect maybe there was a little finagling going on there. And got that boardwalk built. Anyway, the road or path, if you will, from our house was down what we call down the back road, across an Indian mound that's right on the very point of Woodring Point there, and then across that boardwalk and on down to some little bit higher ground and walked down to the post office. And we did not have a road down to the point for a lot of years. The Lee County Co-op put the power across from St. James to Woodring Point And then they cut that swath down through the mangroves that you see through there now, whereas it's just mangroves on both sides. And one of our neighbors decided that was a good time to figure out a way to get a road on down to the Woodring Point. And so with browbeating the county for 3 or 4 or 5 years, they got the bridges fixed and the trees cut down through the line there and kept filling until got down to the area where the mangrove was on both sides. That's a big deal to fill all that in there back those days, one old dump truck we had over here. But eventually got it done, and then as it progressed on down behind our house and down to A.R. Henders was the fellow I'm talking about on down, and then another, 3, 4, 5 years before it got all the way down to the end of the point where it is now. But some fill, some cutting mangroves, and a lot of cussing and carrying on and fighting mosquitoes and whatever it took. And usually when the dump truck came and dumped the sand down there, why, some of us, neighbors and men, women, children, whatever, would go down and level that dirt out so that the dump truck could make it a little bit farther next time. But big deal there. And I don't know what year it was that the co-op came across, but we had
Could have been 41.
We had power line down a quarter mile or so from our house, and didn't have any power for another 2 years or so, I guess. You just learn to get along the way you've been getting along, and unless something comes along that really catches your eye. My mom eventually went to the fellow that was in charge of the Lee County Co-op and asked him, how about getting the power down to our house, Mrs. Woodring, you don't have power? She said, hell no. 2 years, them poles are down there. Oh, he said. So within about 2 weeks' time, we had a couple electricians come down and to string us up there, and we've been powerful ever since. What else you know?
You mentioned neighbors, and we have a cottage here, the Burnap Cottage. Now, I believe the Woodrings built it. Your dad built it, perhaps?
Is the story, and I'm not sure how true that is, but there's
It's still standing. So.
a whole, yeah, barely. When they loaded it on that barge, I figured they was going to lose it.
Right.
The Burnap family, and there was a preacher involved there, and I don't know who all before my time.
Right.
During my time, there was a lady named Critchley, who was her brother, I guess, was one of the Burnaps. Anyway, she had the big house that's there, which is not there anymore. And the Burnap Cottage, they call that, which she...
So she owned both houses?
Yes, she did, and the property there. And she had run into from folks named Brewster from Sheep's Head Bay, New York. They came down every year, and she did too for the winter season, when there was supposedly no mosquitoes around. And so she rented them a bedroom in the big house. And strange, if you will, everybody's bedroom back in them days was damn small. Like this area we got here was bigger than most of the bedrooms in that house. But anyway, they rented the bedroom. They lived there for 2 or 3 years, and then eventually they bought the little house.
Which is our Burnap.
Burnap Cottage, yeah. And they lived there for some years, and he remodeled that and fixed it all up and changed it around, had a stairway or something up top, I can't remember what. But anyway, eventually when Mrs. Critchley died, then the whole property was sold, and at one time Tom Wood, who was the first Ding Darling Wildlife manager here, lived in the big house, which is gone, like I say, but the small house sort of went into disrepair, if you will. One of the old fishermen that fished around there that survived the 44 hurricane caught pneumonia and died in there. So that's another story for you. He may ghost around there some nighttime.
Another addition to the ghost story. All right.
My uncle said sometimes fishing at nighttime around behind the Burnap Cottage area there is what we call Mabel's Cove, after Mabel Critchley, the lady that owned the property. And my uncle was there by himself one night and said that that the fellow that died, Lee Greer, was sitting on the bow of his boat and said, you know, any mullet here tonight? And I said, I just pulled up my net and went home.
His name was Lee Greer.
Lee Greer.
That's a new one. Wow.
He's the guy that died in the cottage.
Uh-huh.
And the story about Lee Greer. Lee Greer and John Dugan were fishermen for the Punta Gorda Fish Company. Punta Gorda Fish Company had a house in the middle of the bay down there where you could sell your fish. And if you fished for the Punta Gorda Fish Company, just a long time ago, they would build you some kind of a domicile where you could live. So they had built these things they called lighters, which is about as far as from here to that other wall over there, they would float. And so they built it in Punta Gorda and put it up on a barge, bring it down to Tarpon Bay. They brought 2 down. Went in behind Green Point, which is a mangrove point, sticks out in the middle of Tarpon Bay, put piling down and set these 2 buildings up on the piling for these fishermen to live in. And one was Lee Greer and the other was John Dugan. John Dugan had a peg leg. Got pictures of him somewhere.
Yeah, in Betty Ann Holt's book, we've got a picture, yeah.
So along comes the 44 Hurricane and blowed these things to hell and gone. Lee was smart enough, he didn't stay out there. He come to the point, the Woodring Point, and spent the night there with us, but John Dugan decided he was going to stay. And so when the building went to pieces and the water was high, he got up on the roof, his story, and rode that roof like a horse till daylight. Peg leg now. When he got off of there, the daylight come, he got off the roof, he got through the mangroves, which is about a good a half mile or so between Green Point and Woodring Point. And so between he got through the mangroves, some deep water area, and across Mabel's Cove, where all the Ghost was still there, and up on the dock there in the back of the cottage. We had a dock in the back. Crawled up on there. He was all skint from one end to the other, as you can imagine, bruised up, whatever, from being cut through the mangroves and the oyster shells and riding that roof all night. And he didn't have a stitch of clothes on. Laid up there, they say he looked like a dead frog. When Mom went out the door next morning, the first thing she found, the tide had gone down, she found his peg leg laying out in the yard. Knowing he's probably there somewhere, so they started looking for him. Found him up on that dock, and picked him up and brought him to the house. And Mom had a bottle of gin that she had way back in the closet where none of my uncles and aunts could find it. So brought that bottle of gin out and gave him a snort just like this, and he come to. He lived on Woodring Point for quite a few years after that. One of the old neighbors there next door built him a little old shed shack in the back, and he stayed there, and he made minnow nets, handmade minnow nets. Now, minnow net mesh is just about that big, you know, and so that's what he knitted, and take him about 30 days to make a net, meshes, and then put the brails, the hand line, and the lead line, leads, and everything on it, and sold them for $30. Hell, I got cast nets over there. You couldn't buy a hand line for $30 nowadays, and they're not made in the United States either. What else you know?
Well,
Can I just say that your mother was just wonderful. She had these bottles of gin probably hidden in a lot of places in the house that saved a lot of people.
No, not really. The thing was that she didn't drink. And so the only reason she kept it was for special occasions like this. But she did have to keep them hid simply because half-brother next door, Lee Greer, John Dugan, Earl Johnson, all these guys would drink. And I told a story the other day when my dad was alive, you know, they got whiskey in by boats. They brought it in from the Bahamas. And a boatload of whiskey is not easy to hide. You got to do something with it because the revenues were looking. Anyway, they buried it at different places. And one of the places they buried liquor was underneath the clubhouse, the old Charlie McCullough house next door. And it was fairly easy digging and high enough they could get quite a few cases underneath there. They, of course, would dig it up when they got ready to sell it and get rid of it. But the guys, my drunken friends around, fishermen, whatever, figured out there might be at least one bottle left over there, and so they went over there and do their different times and dug around. It looked like a herd of gophers had been over there, digging all up. And as far as I know, they never did find a bottle. My dad wasn't too good about leaving that stuff around, I guess. However, I did find one day out in the backyard, built a little fire, and something popped, and the flame came up, and I said, damn, this gin fell on the floor. This was 2 pint bottles of 10 High whiskey that had been buried out there. They never found it. And one of them broke, when they built a fire on it. Of course, I had no idea it was there. And the other one came up, and guess what? It didn't take long to pass it around, and it was gone. 10 High whiskey.
10 High, okay.
That's a good brand back in them days.
And the other building I wanted to make sure we heard something about was the Sanibel School.
Sanibel School. I went there.
That's good. Me too.
Did you go to the old one?
I did. 2nd grade into half of 6th grade.
I did not want to go to school. I was a mama's boy. I liked Woodring Point, and that was a good place for me because I'd get in trouble other places. My mom, when she went to school from Costa, she had to go by school boat from Costa to Punta Blanca Island, which is close by. And kind of strange that whenever I had to go to school, there were 2 or 3 other kids on the point there with us at the time, and there was not a road, and so the county paid her a school boat to go from Woodring Point to the end of Tarpon Bay. And that was like about a 20-minute ride. And we always, early in the morning, you had to be early enough to get to the school bus. And wintertime was colder than hell, as you might imagine. Summertime, the mosquitoes would meet you on both ends when coming and going. If the tide was low, we'd have to walk an oyster bar, which is still there today, but it's full of mangroves. But anyway, she'd pull up that oyster bar, and we'd walk that to the shoreline, and then up to the corner of Periwinkle and Tarpon Bay, where there was a school teacher that lived there. And if the mosquitoes were bad, she'd let us come in and sit on the porch till we got to route bust and whatever. She'd run us out. And of course, then on down to the Sanibel School, which is what, 1.5 miles, 2 miles on up Periwinkle towards this end, towards the east. The schoolhouse was one main building for a lot of years, and then they got to be more kids on the island, and they built a small room on the west side, was called the little room, okay? And that was for the little kids, if you will, 1st and 2nd grade. So I spent a couple of years there. And then one day, teachers were inside, and all us little mean rascals were outside, and close to the front of the little room was a pine tree, and it had a limb sticking out. And so, we had to get up on the edge of the room and jump up and grab that pine tree limb. So everybody else jumped up there, and the old dumbass, I go the same thing, jumped up there, tipped upside down, and broke my arm. Been broke ever since. Well, one of the older boys got a couple of paddles from upstairs and wrapped it up and whatever, had to go to Fort Myers to the doctor, and he said, well, we can fix it, but it's going to hurt. You had to be in the hospital. I don't want to be in the hospital, Mama. So that's why it's still crooked. But anyway, the worst thing of all was I had a pretty blue shirt on that I liked, and he took his scissors and cut that shirt, and I never did get another one.
How old were you then?
About 40, I think.
He was a 6th grader.
I think I was in the 6th grade. No, I mean the 2nd grade, because I was still in the little room, see. Once you graduated to the 3rd grade, you went into the big room.
Right.
And we had a number of teachers over the years. The teacher in the little room at the time was named Mary Odom. And after I got back to school, Mary decided for sure that she'd get this arm straightened out, So she made me carry a couple of damn chunks of wood around the schoolhouse, round and round and round until I got either hid somewhere or she couldn't find me or school took in. But anyway, it never did straighten it out. As you can see, it's still crooked. Let's see, the one teacher that we had in the big room at the time, name was Sarah Robinson. And Sarah Robinson was the lady that lived on the corner of Periwinkle and Tarpon Bay. And she's a pretty nice lady, but you know, if you crossed her, she'd get on you. One day, a couple of the younger kids were still in the little room, went out to the rain tank where we had to catch rainwater because there wasn't anything else to drink. And they had a little drink and they washed their face. And then one of them, a fellow named Don Hires, he is a hellion. He said to the little young lady there, let's get our boots wet. They was wearing shoes. See, I didn't wear no shoes to school, so I didn't have to worry about that. So they got their shoes wet and their socks wet, and they come back in the schoolroom. And the teacher wanted to know who saw that, what made them do it, whatever. And so somehow or other she got the idea I had something to do with it, you know, and so she climbed me pretty good. Well, anyway, I got out of that one. Then that was back in the war days. And Sarah started going with a fella that was a soldier stationed over at Castle Bell Hotel, and they eventually got married. His name was Burke, Walter Burke. And they got married and had a couple of kids and moved to Fort Myers, and that's the last I heard of them. Now, some other teachers, I can remember their names. One of them was named Sowen. Sowen was a pitcher for some of the baseball club, and I can't remember which one it was, but that's one of the things he bragged about and tried to teach us how to play baseball. And one day, I had a lime that was about half green, and somebody did something to me and made me mad, and he ran around the corner of the schoolhouse. Old Sowen and his wife, she was the little room teacher, he was a big room teacher. They had a big trailer out back there, and this guy was running right straight towards that trailer right beside the schoolhouse, and I put that line just as hard as I could, went right by his head and hit the old man's trailer. Ooh, you never heard such cussing and carrying on in all your life. I mean, he was a teacher, but he could cuss.
That's where you learned it.
That's right. Then another one of our teachers was an older gentleman, and pretty smart fella. And I'll tell you how smart he was. He decided that when I was in the 8th grade, that I was so smart that I could go to the 9th grade, just like that, because he said so. And I did. That's good for a while, and then of course next year, 10th grade, had to go to Fort Myers. Now, here's another school boat. Ferry didn't run early enough to take us across the Poderosa, so another gentleman with a cabin cruiser, Jake Stokes, picked us up at Bailey's store and took us to Poderosa and met the school bus over there, which was late getting us to town. But anyway, then we got the ferry back in the afternoon. And then later years, they started running the ferry a little earlier because of us poor, sadable kids. And so, but my senior year, we were riding the ferry both ways, although I didn't ride it a whole lot because I was living in Fort Myers. I was a track and football star. That's not near as important as the really bad deal that my classmates did for them. They elected me president of the senior class. Now that, I had no idea how to be a president of nothing, let alone a senior class. You can imagine a hick boy from Sanibel Island. Anyway, they thought it was great fun, and it turned out pretty good, I guess. I didn't get impeached or anything.
They knew that your charisma would carry you.
Charisma, that's what it is. As soon as we find out what that is, we're all right.
What year was your graduating year?
1954.
1954, all right. And then you joined the service, right?
Jim Pickens and I decided that we needed to get away from this bad place, you know, and so dumb as we were, you never know how smart you are when you're living at home. You just never understand it. Think about it. Wash your clothes, feed you, you know, and of course you're old enough now, you don't have to abide by too many rules. And so, what are you going to leave home for? Because you're dumb. That's why you're. Anyway, Jim and I decided we would just take off and join the Air Force, and we did that. And first thing they sent us to Miami and said, you know, this is where you're inducted. So we got inducted, and then we got shipped to Lackland, Texas for our basic training. And we was there about 2 weeks, I guess. And they had a fellow from Sarasota, was a great big kind of ornery dude, and he got on some of them boys' bad side, and so they had what they call a blanket party. Did y'all ever hear of a blanket party?
No, sounds terrible.
They caught him in this little room, threw the blanket over his head, and beat hell out of him with the flashlights.
Wow.
Beat him up pretty good. Next morning he got up, he was all beat up and banged around. And the instructor said, you know, I don't believe y'all like him. And everybody raised their hands except me. I said, yeah, I don't give a damn whether he stays or not. But anyway, they sent him back to Sarasota. And then so they had this big meeting and said, okay, we got to have somebody to be the flight commander, they called him, see? So they elected me flight commander. Now here again.
Class president, flight
Yeah.
commander.
See, I didn't tell them nothing about being class president, but they said, well, it's you, it's you. And I said, okay, guys, look, remember, he's mean, but I'm ornery. If you're going to be here and do KP and march and all this stuff we got to do, y'all got to pay attention. Otherwise, there's going to be a hell to pay, believe me. So they must have believed me because we graduated with honors.
Wow.
Flight number 292. How about that? I still remember that.
Now, I understand that it was kind of an oddity of where you were stationed overseas because Jim Pickens was also stationed there by chance. Is that true?
No.
No.
They sent him one side of the pond, they sent me the other. He went over to Europe somewhere. But he did travel around some, I guess. I don't know his whole story.
Yeah.
But I was on a remote radar site across Tokyo Bay, which, you know, doesn't sound like it's remote, but it is, or was, I should say. It was a mountain there that they had a radar site on. It kept track of all the bases that were close by, and there were a lot of them, some Japanese, some Navy, Air Force, and Army bases all close by. And that was only a year tour of duty because it was remote. Mm-hmm. And so I enjoyed that pretty good. I liked Japan all right, although I got in some trouble over there too, but you know, there's always something going on. The big problem to me was going overseas. We went by boat from Frisco to Seattle to pick up some more troops and then across. And they had some kind of earthquake or some kind of nonsense in the Aleutian Islands and put the damnedest biggest waves you ever seen in your life come across there. And I thought sure we were going to sink, and so a lot of other people did too. I mean, it was bad. The old boat would go up, 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 up. It seemed like it never was going to come down. And it was not a big ship. So it got beat around pretty bad. Anyway, we survived that. We went across and got to Japan, and there was a fellow there with us who said, look here, troops, I know I've been here before. I know exactly how to do this. Said, we'll go in and get a beer. You know, I didn't drink beer. We went in anyway, and so he's telling the waitress. She said, what's the matter, you GI? You want a beer? I figured out from then on I better go on my own. Never paid any attention to the other guy. Anyway, the only other wild side that I can tell you about back in those days there at that radar site was they started flying the troops to Japan. You know, we were the last ones to go by ship. Thanks a lot. You know, one week later, not have been in the airplane. Anyway, we had an airplane that flew from Seattle into the Johnson Air Base once a week at least, bringing troops. And invariably, he was late on his flight plan. Now, he'd file a flight plan and say, I'm going to leave Seattle at such a time. We're going to be in Japan at such a time. And so you expect him to be somewhere in that range. And this guy was always late, always late. And so if we've got an airplane flying up there, we don't know who the hell he is, we scrambled 2 airplanes to go up there and see, check him out. So he usually wasn't that late, but sometimes he was, and we had to send fighters up there to check him out to see who he was. And once they got there, of course, they read his tail numbers. They know everything's fine, but he'd be anywhere from 30 minutes, sometimes 2 hours late for whatever reason. And the gist of the story is this airplane was Flying Tiger 18 Charlie. Never forget it. Flying Tiger 18 Charlie. And so when I get ready to come back, we flew back. We didn't have to go back in old nasty ship. Guess what airplane I got on?
Flying Charlie.
You got it.
Flying Tiger.
You got it. And I thought, well, he made it all this. maybe we'll make it back. When we did, no big deal. But anyway, I thought that was kind of a funny coincidence. You got any stories to tell?
No, but I want to ask a question that I kind of remember. When you came back, you didn't go right back into fishing, as I recall. You tried a stint up on Captiva, didn't you?
Well, I've always been fishing
Right,
and chasing girls.
right.
But we did lots of things. But I
South Seas?
went to South Seas. Actually, I went to the Captiva Erosion Prevention District up there, working repairing the groins that they had. They'd put the
yeah.
concrete groins out on the beach, thinking that they were going to
The dog bone jetties, right?
dog bone jetties. They're going to collect sand and build Captiva up. Dog bones, because they were like 8 feet tall, had a big circle on one end, one in the middle, and one on the other end. And they put them flat down, put a post in, and they length these things out into the water like 40, 50 feet. Supposedly, like I say, to collect the sand. Well, that didn't work worth a damn. Eventually, they're still there. Most of them are covered up because they covered them up when they dredged and filled. But I had a crew of guys that we repaired the bones on the beach there for, I guess, about 2 or 3 months. And they saw such dumb help or good help or whatever. Paul Stalin was the man that was in charge of South Seas at the time, hired me to come in up there. And first off, we went to Long Island and did dog bones up there for one of the rich folks up there. What the hell was his name? Anyway, we took all the equipment that because he built these things on Captiva, had the forms and everything, poured concrete, and let them set and cure, and then on to use them on the beach. So this fellow named DuPont owned a big old place up on Long Island, and decided that they would help his beach up there, which is eroding too, and talked Paul Stalin, my boss, into bringing the equipment up there and a crew. And so we built dog bones up there and put them out on the beach. And they didn't last up there even as long as they did down here, man. That Atlantic is really mean, and it tore them up within a couple of years' time. There was nothing left there at all. But then from that job on to South Seas, I spent 4 years at South Seas. When I started as a labor pusher and went up to assistant manager, or general manager, or whatever you want to call it. Wally Watts, who was a Radio Corporation of America vice president, owned South Seas, and Stalin reported directly to him, and then I was Stalin's right-hand, left-hand man, whatever you want to call it. Did a lot of things up there when I was there. Yeah, we built a golf course and built that one motel that they have since torn down, and built a great big complex for repairs and things, and remodeled all the cottages. You know, they were like board and batten and no air conditioning and rat holes everywhere, and they were still getting top dollar for them. But we went in and put carpet in them. Most of them put a second wall, so you had some insulation in between there. New bathrooms, and the ones that were big enough, we put a little sink and refrigerator and stuff in them. And of course, then the rates really went up. You know, that's the time you jack the rates up whenever you get all those amenities. But they were really pretty comfortable cottages once we got done with them. You know, originally they were built lots of years ago, and to remodel them, do a first-class job, you just have to tear them down And we didn't have the money to do that, nor the inclination, because they were rustic, if you will. I don't know whether any of them are still left up there now or not, but that was, they probably tore them all down. Anyway, we did build the golf course and hired some folks from the other coast to come over and lay it out, and then we had a fleet of trucks to haul the dirt in up there and build it, and turned out to be a pretty fine course. And I guess today it's still as good as it was then, or maybe better. I'm not sure.
Maybe.
I'm not a golfer.
One more big question I had, and we're very thankful that the Woodrings have given us Esperanza's sewing machine and her one of her stoves. I'm not sure. I think there were two that she worked with.
Yeah, this is latter day.
Yeah. So we know that Esperanza was a wife, mother, fishing guide, great cook. What do you want us to know about Esperanza? Because we talk about her a lot here at the museum.
Well, it's kind of hard to explain a lady who did all the different things that she did, and with grace, I guess I'd say, but not in a bragging way. An example would be someone would say, well, Mrs. Woodring, I hear you're the greatest guide around, that you know where all the fish are, you catch snook and this, that, and the other. And she'd say, man, if you want to catch some fish, I'll take you fishing. But I'm not a snook fisherman. She didn't fish for snook, although she caught a few over the years. But, I can bet you that we're going to catch some fish. But, greatest, this, that, and the other doesn't really mean anything. What means anything is if you produce, and we will catch some fish. Back then, the fishing was that good, you could almost bet for sure that you would catch fish if you went fishing. And, good days, bad days, whatever. But the proof is in the pudding, as the saying goes. And there's a place up in back in Duffy's Creek where there was a little sand hill on the mouth of the island there, and if they desired, and a lot of the old timers that went with her a couple times a week and year after year would say, well, can we have a shore lunch today? So the Island Inn and Casabel would fix up a basket with sandwiches and extra stuff, some bacon to fry. And Mom had a spot there on that little hill on the mangroves there. She'd stop in there usually 11, 12 o'clock, and by then always had 1, 2, 3 fish, so we could have a shore lunch of fish for sure, and did many, many, many times. And so this got to be known as Duffy's Tavern, because obviously when they were ashore, they'd have to have a snort or two that they took with them and relieve themselves in the back edge when there wasn't nobody looking. Man, the fish, fresh like that, it just doesn't get any better, no matter what kind it is. And of course, sometimes her son would happen to be guiding somewhere close by and smell that fish fried and stop in, and mostly I would get invited in and have fresh fish with them too. But I guess the proof of the fishing expertise, if you will, is probably mostly a way to express that. We had fish around our dock all the time. They'd be mullet and sheep's head and, excuse me, grouper. Everybody says, grouper on your dock? Well, yeah, we had grouper there all the time. And if she decided we were going to have grouper for supper, she'd take a hand line, and put it out from the beach with a pinfish or a hunk of mullet or something, and flip it out and leave it. Usually within 20, 30 minutes at the most, we'd come up with a nice grouper, big enough for supper. And never a chance in hell that we were not going to have fish for supper. It just didn't happen that way. So you never even think about it. And now, I don't even see a grouper out there, period, for days and days and days. It's really an oddity in that respect. But as far as she was concerned, knowing what to do, where to do in the fishing thing was her big deal, but she just flat didn't take allocates, like, oh, I'm the greatest guy around. It was a lot of years that we didn't have a telephone, and so everything had to be done by word of mouth from the Island Inn to the old timers that came and went or stayed months at a time. And if someone that wanted to go fishing and didn't know about her particularly, the other folks would clue them in. And she would get some of the bookings for, at least a year ahead. And a couple of the couples in particular, I can remember the Beaches, were folks that came every year and went 2 days a week with her. Rain or shine, didn't make any difference. And, it just was a good, like a family time, if you will. And they'd go up, they'd have lunch, and they'd even take a nap if they wanted to, and they didn't worry about bringing fish home. All they wanted to do was have a good shore lunch, have a good time, and they may take a nap afterwards. 2 o'clock or so, when they'd come home. We've got pictures of her boat. In the other room is one, there's 4 folks in there. Usually she only took 2, but that was a later day boat, if you will, with an inboard. When she first started guiding, and we got some pictures of that too, was a Briggs & Stratton air-cooled motor. And you crank that thing with a rope. You put a rope around the pulley and give it a yank, and that's what she did, and crank that thing up. And if it didn't run a time or 2 in the morning, it was wet, she'd take the spark plug out, take it ashore, put a little gasoline on it, and set it afire. Got that plug good and hot, bring it back, put it back in, and that boat would crank up and run. That's something that she devised on her own, and it worked, obviously. That boat in particular had two chairs in the back, and so generally that's what she liked was to take 2 folks out, man and his wife, or 2 guys. And occasionally she'd get a smart aleck, a guy that thought he knew more than she did, or give her a hard time or whatever. And generally that only lasted for 1 trip. Either she didn't take him back anymore, or she'd take him somewhere. Like one old man in particular, a fellow named George Williamson, was a lawyer from Minnesota. And he wasn't a bad guy, but he's a blowhard. He talked too damn much. Oh, we're going to catch these fish today. We're going to do this, that, and the other. So he got up on the bow of the boat and was trying to get his line down around a particular spot where he could see a fish or something. And the boat drifted away. He's left hanging on the limb there to keep from getting his feet wet. And eventually he just couldn't hang on anymore. Well, of course, Mom got the blame for that. But she told him when we got out of the boat, George, if you fish more and talk less, you catch more fish. Being a good sport, he went back and told the folks at the Island Inn, and they got a good laugh out of it, but everybody remembered that, so she didn't have any more trouble with George. Anyway, about Mom in particular, I was...
Did she make the bread?
Bread? Yes, she did. She made biscuits.
Biscuits.
Yep, that's most everything we ate back then was biscuits. It was simpler and easier and quicker, if you will. And that's one of the pictures that Charlie's got there, where she's making biscuits in the back in that wood stove. The stove that she originally cooked on was made by the Atlanta Stove Works, that's a plain flat top with all cast iron. And the one that I think is in that picture is a little bit fancier with some stuff up top of the oven and things. But anyway, she knew how to cook biscuits or fish or just about anything else on that old stove. And that means, you got to put the wood in there the right amount, keep the heat the way you want it, and the way to jockey the pots and pans or frying pans on the stove is important to keep the heat the way you like it to do the job. And she is really good at that, for sure. And if she had a problem with anyone, there was always stove wood. She'd take a piece of that and bring it in. She never hit me, but...
She wanted to.
You knew, yeah.
Yeah, she probably wanted to lots of times. Lots of times, I'm sure of that. But anyway, we had a pretty doggone good life on Woodring Point before the road, in that there was not anything else going on. Very few boats, very few people around, period, because they didn't walk down there unless they were, when my dad was alive, looking for a pint of whiskey or something. But if we needed a neighbor, and sometimes we did, and a good example of this is Francis Bailey's first wife, Pauline, they were clearing property over on the Gulf one day, and I don't think Francis was trying to get rid of everybody. He hit her in the head with a grubbing hoe, cut a hole in her head. And so, not really bad, but knew it needed stitches or whatever. So they made it down to the point, and getting late in the day, and Mom took them across to Punta Rassa and called a taxi into the hospital and got her stitched up and then brought her back. But who else do you know had a boat? They would take you where you needed to go at the time you needed to go. So that's it's kind of hard to believe in a way, but no matter how far away the neighbors were, some way, somehow, you get word to them, and they would help you, whether you're sick or sober or sorry or whatever. One of the things that Mom talked about happened all the time with a fisherman who might be 3, 4, 5 miles away, Wolford, anywhere on the islands or whatever. They'd come to the point looking for some liquor. And one old man in particular sent word down by one of his fishermen, said, "Tell Sam to send me some liquor." And so my dad sent him a quart of whiskey, and he came back 3 or 4 days later and said, "Sam, why did you send me a quart of whiskey? That's just enough liquor to make me mad."
Well, we feel very fortunate that you are one of our island historians, whether you want to be or not.
You know what my mama always said?
What?
"What's in it for me?" That was one of her favorite expressions. People are always coming around saying, "Now, Mrs. Woodring, we want you, you sit right there, we're going to take your picture, and you'll be in the magazine, you this, that, and the other." Yeah, we hear you the baits fisherman around, you catch all the snook, you do all this stuff. And she listened for a while, and she had a mean look when she wanted you. She'd rear back and look at him and said, "Yeah, and what's in it for me? Oh, well, you're going to be famous." Who the hell wants to be famous?
She did epitomize friends helping friends.
Yes, she did. Yep.
She did.
And again, that comes from just doing it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Now, Becca's got a question.
One question in the back.
What happened during Prohibition? How did you get your food?
Well, most of the liquor, there were some stills around. My dad had a still, and a couple of the other guys, Earl Johnson had a still. But most of the liquor came from the Bahamas. My dad had boats. He hired crew to go to the Bahamas and bring back the wines and cordials, really fancy stuff. Boca Grande was prime time for good liquor, good cordials and wines. And so he made good money at that. For a number of years, and of course the revenuers would chase the boats, and the revenuers and the sheriff would come around looking around the point. They never actually caught him with anything, although they give him a hard time enough that he was smart enough to bury it or keep it hid somewhere. Sometimes they'd take the whole boat and carry it back in the mangroves and hide it there. There were no airplanes around, so they weren't looking for it. But Them was good times in one way and bad times in another. You don't want the sheriff knocking on your door if you don't have to.
Sometimes we hear stories about how thick the mosquitoes were. What was it really like with the mosquitoes?
Well,
She wants to know how bad the mosquitoes really were. And I would add, did you have remedies like smudge pots or anything?
Swishers they show?
mostly we just had a sharp knife because they were so thick you'd cut them with a knife. Now, Francis Bailey tells the story that if you took a bucket and swung it around your head one time, it would be full. And that's not too damn far off, I'll tell you the truth. They were some kind of thick. My dad would take, on the front porch, they'd get up on the wall and they'd cover the wall, just black. And he'd take a smudge and go along and singe their wings. And my mom would sweep up and, get a gallon can full of mosquitoes, and that's a lot of mosquitoes.
Right.
But, you didn't really think that much about it. They were there and you were there, and what the hell are you going to do? You're going to go fishing or whatever you're going to do. Kids, we're so mean, it doesn't make no difference for us. We'd get him on his arm and let him start drawing blood, and then take a pair of scissors and cut his tail off, and the blood would just pour out. What else is a kid going to do with all the mosquitoes? But we did use we did use smudge pots, and always in the yard we had the pine trees had pine straw. Pine straw makes a good smoke. And when my mom was on wash day, usually on a Monday, which is wash day, she had a wash pot, an old tub outside, build a fire, and put the clothes in there and boil them. And you'd have to have at least 2 smudges around, smokes to keep them off. And as far as a mosquito brush, what we call them, yeah, we take the heart out of a palmetto and make a mosquito brush out of that. And anytime you went anywhere, you know, you had your own brush, you'd be brushing yourself to try to keep them off of you. Again, most everybody was so mean it didn't make any difference, I guess. They just kept on doing whatever they had to do. The nighttime, the old houses that had cracks and holes in them you could throw a dog through, everybody had a mosquito bar at nighttime. They put it up over the bed at daytime, roll it up, and at nighttime it was all cheesecloth, and you put it down over the bed so that the mosquitoes couldn't get to you. And that's good in one way, but you know, it's hotter than hell too, because you get no breeze. And the only thing you had, again, take a small palmetto fan and ring it with a cloth around and sew it, and a little short fan tail on it, and fan yourself. And you would go to sleep, fan it a little bit, and wanted to get in there every now and then, have to kill him. The best thing that we had in my time that I can remember was an insect repellent, or not a repellent, it was a can of powder. It's called B brand insect powder. And of course it had a lot of pyrethrum in it, I guess, and you burn that stuff. And like today, the picks is pretty much the same kind of stuff, you know, because you hear the mosquito, you'd be going around, this smudge, this stuff is going around in the air, and you see it, and you hear him go, they sing, you know. You ever hear them sing? The damn right they can sing. And yeah, they do it just for meanness, I think, around your ears, because they really, they want to see whether you're going to flinch or not, I guess.
Well, we've worn you out.
One more lady.
Oh, one more lady? One more lady?
A question I often get when people come to visit us here at the museum is about Esperanza's name. They want to know, was she Spanish?
Yes, supposedly she's of the Padilla family. And the Padillas were, her grandfather came from the Canary Islands, which is Spanish, and fell in love with a Mexican lady in Key West. And so that's where the prolific Padilla family came from. And one of the pictures of the Padilla family, my mom is in my grandmother's arms. And she was, just a few months old at the time, evidently. But she never spoke Spanish. She did when she was young. Obviously, that's all they had around Cayo Costa. But later years, she just got away from it altogether. She could understand a little bit, but she was, I guess, as much Spanish as anything. I've got a fellow working for me as a Mexican fellow, and he was at the museum the other day and saw that story there. And so hey, you know, look at this, you're part Mexican. I said, yeah, we may be kin folks, Mexican. Who knows, right? Anyway, thank you folks for coming.